It's June on the Range, and I finally finished another Western. Thank goodness. It took forever to finish Gunslinger. It felt like that was, again, partially because I was traveling and everything else, but I finished another one that I picked up from my local library because I realized there was no way I was going to get Lonesome Dove and some of those other ones finished. I probably will be reading more Westerns soon just because I've been exposed to a good number for June on the Range that either I hadn't taken it into my head to read or I just hadn't ever gotten around to or hadn't heard of. So I am here with Blood on the Trail by Terrence McCauley. I'm in my Willie Nelson shirt, so we are ready for some outlaws today. This is apparently the first in a series that this McCauley just started. It's about a lawman named Jeremiah Halstead, and this novel is about him. He's caught a head of an outlaw gang, and he is taking this guy back to, I think it's Helena, in Montana. He's taking this guy to Helena to be hanged. And he gets, as he's going along, he gets trapped in this town called Silver Cloud that is owned, I guess, sort of owned by this mine owner that is kind of in charge of everything. This ended up being a really fun book. I was not sure when I first picked it up, because what happened were two glaring editing errors in the first 3 chapters that left me, after I read the book, and I was like, oh, this actually really was a really good Western, good adventure, lots of fun in that respect. I nearly DNF'd it just because of the 2 editing errors that happened, and I was like, did no one help this man? What is going on? Because the first one, they used the wrong version of road. They used R-O-A-D instead of R-O-D-E, and to the point that I couldn't make sense of the sentence when I read it. I was like, what did that mean? Then I went back and I was like, oh, they used the wrong word. And then there was another part that it felt like the author kind of put this in as, well, here's all these outlaws and I'm in this gang and I'm going to have to introduce them some way, and then forgot to go back and fix it, because each one was sort of introduced, and here's Weasel and his sneaky little face did such and such, and then he throws it over to Mick, he's the red-headed Irishman, who throws it over to Pole, the really tall guy, who throws it back to Bug, who's got bug eyes. It felt like and it was done within a page and a half. Within a page and a half, all these outlaws in this gang were sort of introduced in the most ham-fisted way possible, with them each kind of like, it felt like going down a row, like you'd watch on Hee Haw, where they all kind of turned to each other and went down a line of people, and said, like, introduced themselves and then passed it on to the next person. It really felt like the author just sort of put that in there to be like, well, I've got to introduce these people somehow, but here's who I'm going to have, and let me put them right here, and then never went back and fixed that. And that should have been, an editor should have caught that and been like, hey, you probably need to introduce these guys a little more gradually, or it would read better if these guys were introduced a little more gradually. And those two things nearly, because they happened so soon. That the thing with the outlaws happened within the 2nd chapter, and I think the road incident was in the 3rd one. That within 3 chapters, I was like, what? This is a mess. Who edited this? But then when I got past that, it was fine. Everything was fine. Everything was good once you got past that. Jerry Halstead is kind of a jerk, and that's actually okay for his character. He is the hero and everything, but he's kind of, I wouldn't say unlikable, but he does not make a concentrated effort for anyone else in the book to like him. They keep throwing around the fact that they all think he's half Native American in Montana. He is from Texas, and he's half Mexican. So for whatever reason, they keep in Montana thinking he's half Native American. So there's this whole racial aspect that keeps getting thrown around in here. The only thing that I feel like wasn't cleared quite up with that part was the sheriff in Silver Cloud was incredibly unlikable and racist, but he also sort of becomes, by the end, Halstead's like, well, I kind of respect him, and da-da-da, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's still really not who you'd want to hang out with. But the actual action is one of those things that just starts happening. I think maybe a complaint for people that are not into a certain type of Western, they would think that there's not enough threat put forward for Halstead. He always has the drop on everybody. You never really feel in any real not a whole lot of danger for him, just because he is so good at what he does. But on the other hand, I didn't mind that, because there was other stuff going on, because this starts out as not just him with this confrontation with the outlaw gang. It also involves a murder mystery that kind of ends up happening while he's in town. Soiled Dove gets killed, and he has to figure that out too while this is all going on, which he kind of figures out, but it kind of series of events kind of spills that out. But he's got that happening in the background too, so this really, it's not just a book about a standoff between him and the outlaw gang, which that actually sort of saved the book, because if it had been that, it would have been pretty boring. In the downtime between when the gang gets there and starts the whole shootout, he has this whole sort of murder mystery thing and trying to figure out what was going on with this girl at the brothel and why she would have gotten killed, which really had nothing to do with the gang. It really didn't, and I don't think it was ever supposed to be connected to the gang in any way. It was just something that happened while he was there. So, anyway, this ended up being a really, really surprisingly good book. I was not expecting this to be as decent as it was, and I really liked it, to the point that I would probably read the next one in this series. Now, that being said, I really hope the editing. So somebody needs to help with the editing on this one, because those two things should have been caught. Like, when you're using the wrong word to the point that I can't understand what the paragraph was saying, somebody dropped the ball on the editing at the start there. But other than that, just get past those parts and be aware of those two parts, and it reads really well. It goes along really fun and not real hokey and anything like that, just really enjoyable. Now, I had mentioned in the first June on the Range that I would talk about or link and mention some of my favorite Westerns. One of my favorite Westerns is one that I'm going to mention 3. 2 you've probably heard of, 1 definitely I'm sure you've heard of, and 1 you maybe haven't ever heard of at all, but I think is great. The first one is, of course, Tombstone. That's one of my absolute favorite movies. I think it's Val Kilmer's best performance he ever did in anything, and it just captures what a Western, as what people think of a Western, should be. It's not uber dark. It's fun. There is seriousness to it. There are terrible things that happen. There are bad guys. There are good guys. It all just kind of falls into place. And Tombstone's just a really, really exceptionally good movie in general. The second one is the newest True Grit. True Grit is one of my favorite books. The original True Grit, the one with John Wayne, I don't think is very good, because they went and did an awful lot of stuff that had nothing to do with the book. And the book is what works. And the newest True Grit, the Coen Brothers True Grit, stays with the book. It's about this girl named Maddie, and her father gets killed, and she is determined to find this outlaw who killed her father. So she goes and tracks down the meanest hired lawman or former lawman she can find, and that ends up being Rooster Cogburn, and she ends up getting tied up with him and this other U.S. Marshal kind of bounty hunter person named LaBeef, and this whole sort of interaction of people who don't necessarily like each other or agree with each other, but they all kind of have a same goal and they all care about each other. And that one ends in a very, it's a coming of age, but it's also, Maddie's a badass, and also has a whole element of these kind of messed up men that she interacts with, who are still good men in how that is presented, and not always likable. Cogburn nor LaBeef are always likable at all, and she doesn't even like them all the time, but there's a connection there that makes for a bigger story, and the Coen brothers version hits all of that. The third movie is the one that probably nobody has ever heard of, and it's called The Dark Valley. It is actually a Swiss or Austrian, it's Swiss, I think, film that I would suggest getting the subtitle version instead of the dub, mainly because of the main actor. The main actor is, you probably would never have seen him except in the Maleficent movies. He plays Diaval, the raven turned human. He is a British actor, but he actually is fluent in German. So this movie is originally in German, and it's about this really isolated valley in Switzerland or Austria, I can't remember which, Switzerland, I believe. Really isolated valley that he is this unknown person who kind of goes to, and as he goes into this town, you sort of realize there's a lot of really awful stuff going on, and this one teenage girl comes to him asking for help because there is a whole sort of thing that happens, and there's some trigger warnings in this one too, but there's a whole series of stuff that happens when a girl is going to get married, and she wants him to help, and you kind of end up finding out why he's back there eventually, and you find out what is going on with the whole situation and the kind of cultish undertones a little bit, and the whole reason why this character, and I don't even think this character's ever named very much. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, and Sam Riley, the actor, has a very, he looks like a small person, and you don't expect the voice to come out of him that comes out of him. That's why I say listen to the sub rather than the dub, because the voice that comes out of him, he has a really gravelly, distinctive voice, and it sounds right for his character. It sounds great for his character of this guy who just is, you cannot figure out. It's one of the few movies that the good guy really ends up winning, not so much because of skill, but because he has a better weapon than everybody else, and that is absolutely accurate in Western and Civil War history, and they even make a point of that in the movie, of the fact that he came from America and he has an American gun that's a better gun than what they're using over in this town. And they blend alternative music, like modern alternative music, into this movie really well. Dark Valley is just, it shocked me how much I liked that movie. It was such a good movie, and I'm gonna link the trailer, but I would, if you can find the sub instead of the dub, I would suggest the sub, simply because I don't know, the sub kind of undercuts a little bit of the character, because some of the character is just Riley's voice when he talks, and is kind of very not off-putting, but unsettling when he talks because of how his voice sounds. in a movie. And if you've seen him in Maleficent or Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, then you would understand that, oh, that voice does not sound like that should be coming out of that guy. But it is. And it goes along with his character very, very well and what's happening, and actually kind of makes him seem a little bit more like a credible threat, too. But those are my 3 Western movie recommendations that I will link the trailers to. If I can find the trailers, I think I should be able to find the trailers to all of them in here. And a book recommendation for maybe getting a better editor on the first couple chapters, but an actually really, really good book, which also makes a point about editing that get a decent editor, like publishing houses and whatever, because if you don't, you can really hurt an author or hurt a situation where somebody will DNF a book just because it's a struggle to get into. So I will leave all of that there and move on. I think my next one is I have finished a bunch of true crime books. So, and one that is a Western ARC copy that is a biography. Finished some of that, so I will get into that in the next video and continue on. I have another one. Continue on with June on the Range.